Hi class, welcome to lesson number 10 in the AP Macroeconomics class. Lesson 9 went over the consumer surplus and producer surplus concepts, and we try to show graphically how those relate to if a market price and price and quantity and things like that. So the homework question that I asked you guys last time was, say for some reason that my marker, right, the child is producing, the marginal cost was $5. I asked you to draw a consumer surplus and producer surplus. So looking over to the graph to here, to my left, right? So I've drawn a graph, right, from last time, sort of looks the same, right? But the market price this time was $5, right? That's the marginal cost. I said, here's my $5 thing. I said, show me, the producer surplus and consumer surplus. Well, we said that consumer surplus, right, is above the price point, market price, and is below the demand graph. So this area right here is the consumer surplus. The producer surplus is above the supply line, right? This is the supply line, and it's above it, but it's below the market price, right? So this happens to be my producer surplus, right? So this is my CS, consumer surplus. This triangle here below is my producer surplus, PS, and that's how you draw it, right? So, again, in economics, practice makes perfect like anything else. So draw as many graphs as you can on your own time so that you get the hang of it and you understand the concepts behind it. So today what we're going to go over is a brand new concept which is very important in microeconomics. It's called elasticity. Has nothing to do with elasticity you guys have probably think about before. Elasticity in economics, like everything else, is a definition for something, right? On the basic side of things, elasticity really talks about the responsiveness to price changes, okay? And why is that important? It's really important to think about elasticity for a couple of good reasons, right? First good reason to think about for elasticity is, say you're a producer, okay? And I am producing, let's say cars. I'm producing cars, okay? Let's take a popular company. Let's take Ford, okay? So Ford produces cars, right? So what's really important to think about responsive price changes is, say for some reason that I want to make more profits, okay? Say I increase my cost for the car, right? So say the amount I charge for the car, I want to increase by about 10%, right? I want to make more profits. Well, in basic economics that you've learned in the past, what's going to happen is that if I start to charge more money, right, my price goes up, right? This is my demand, right? The quantity demanded, right, decreases, right? That's the reason why people just don't charge more and more. So elasticity really sees, okay, well, listen, if I change the price by 5%, how many consumers will I lose? Or will I really lose that many consumers, right? So elasticity discusses the responsiveness in price changes, and that's what will be our main topic today, okay? So with that being said, let's break down the definitions, let's do it graphically, and all the fun that we normally have. Let's apply that to the concept of elasticity, okay? So elasticity is pretty important in the sense that from a consumer sense and also in the producer sense, I personally think it's more important in the producer sense, but you should also think about it from a consumer sense. Understanding for both views is very important. But, okay, so we said elasticity, right? So we said this is the main concept. We said it's elasticity, right? We said, what's it, basically elasticity? We said, well, elasticity basically discusses the responsiveness, right? Responsiveness to price changes, right? Price changes, and changes is by delta. If you know me, I was like delta instead of change. So responsiveness to price changes. So that being said, let's talk about a pretty broad equation to explain elasticity in more detail. My first equation I'm going to talk about is that my total revenue, okay, my total revenue is equal to my price, okay, P is price, times the quantity, okay? My total revenue, TR, is equal to my price times the quantity. Okay, why is that important? Because when you talk about elasticity, we're going to talk about these two things. Okay, talk about how price and quantity change and how they respond to each other. And it's really important because as a producer, the amount of money I make, my revenue, is dependent on my price and my quantity. Either of these changes, my revenue changes, okay? So let's talk about, okay, my first scenario, right, is say for some reason as a producer, right, I said I was Ford, okay, I'm producing cars. So say that I've decided to increase my price, okay? So let's say my price goes up, okay? I've increased my price by about 10%, okay? In the first scenario we're going to talk about, my quantity demanded, okay? My quantity demanded, right, this is very important to understand, this is my quantity demanded, okay? Is going to go down, right? Whenever you increase your price, what happens to your quantity demanded? It's law of demand. Law of demand says my quantity demand is going to go down. So it's going to go down in the first scenario by 10%, right? Understand that when the price and the quantity changes are equivalent to each other, right? It's 10% up, 10% down, okay? My price and quantity change the same. We describe this as a proportional change, right? Because it's proportional because my price and quantity change the same, or it's called unit elastic, okay? So we describe this as unit elastic. And don't worry about it if you don't understand this for now, because I'm going to dig into more details. It's basically unit elastic. Some call it as proportional change, okay? Because it's proportional, right? 10% up, 10% down. 10% price goes up, 10% quantity demand goes down. All right, that's my first one. Let's talk about my second scenario. My second scenario is as Ford, I've increased my price by 10%, okay? I'm not going to change this too much. I'm not going to change the price too much, right? The price goes up by 10%. I've charged more by 10% for my cars. Now, my second scenario, right? Watch what happens to my quantity demanded. My quantity demanded, and guys, this is examples. I'm just giving it to you, so you don't have to understand. Wait, how is he getting these numbers? No, I'm just making these up. Okay. So my quantity demanded, it always goes down. Okay. Whenever my price goes up, quantity demand always goes down. If other things are equal. Okay. Holding all else equal. Ceteris paribus. That's a pretty important concept. But my quantity demanded goes down, and well, this is the major difference. How much does it go down by? Well, in my example, I'm going to say that it's going to go down by more. My quantity demanded actually goes down by 15%. Okay. Now, when this happens, when my quantity demanded goes down more, okay, by my price up, so what I'm saying is the change in quantity demanded is higher than the change in price, right? Look at this. Change in quantity demanded, 15%. Change in price, 10%. When this happens, right, it's called more than a proportional change, or it's called being elastic, okay? That's called being elastic. All right? Now, let's talk about my third scenario. I'm going to write the third scenario over here, okay? My third scenario talks about the exact opposite. My price goes up, right? I'm going to write this down, okay? So all of you can be on the same position. Same example, I'm Ford. I've increased my price up by 10%, right? But in this example, what happened to my quantity demanded is it still goes down, right? I'm not changing any of that, but it only goes down by 5%, okay? And that is being called inelastic, okay? That is called inelastic. Make sense? That's called inelastic. All right, so we have three scenarios. We said one is it's unit elastic if it's a proportional change. That's when your price and quantity change by the same amount, same percentage. Two, our second scenario was our price changes, but our quantity demanded drops by more than that, right? And that's called elastic. And our third scenario we talked about last is that my price goes up, but my quantity demand goes down by a little less than the price. And that's called inelastic. All right. Now, this is fine. I've given you examples, but the way we're going to explain this in more detail is by showing you an equation so that you guys know exactly what's going on. So, with that being said, let's erase this right over here, and let's talk about the equation that talks about elasticity of demand. All right. So my elasticity of demand is different from elasticity of supply, right? My elasticity of demand talks about the responsiveness in demand to the price change. Elasticity of supply, right, talks about the changes in supply when price changes, okay? So let's talk about my elasticity of demand, right? Let's talk about my elasticity of demand, okay? The elasticity of demand is as follows. It's the change, okay? The change in the quantity in the quantity demanded, right? The percent change, excuse me. The percent change, delta is change, okay? In quantity demanded, QD is quantity demanded, divided by, right? The percent change in price, okay? In price. Now, the way we're going to explain this is by giving you examples, right? So my first example, what did I say? My first example, I said that price went up by 10% and the quantity demanded went down by 10%. So look at this. Quantity demanded, what was the change? Remember that? It decreased by 10%, right? Decreased by 10%. And then my price, I said I increased by 10%, okay? Now, one important thing to note is that ignore when I'm talking about elasticity, you always want to talk about the percent change, okay? What does that really mean? It means that you don't have to worry about is it going up or down, worry about the percentages it's changing in. So this you can kind of factor out, okay? 10 over 10 is 1, okay? When ED, or elasticity of demand, is equal to 1, we call it as being unit elastic. Remember from the last one, I said the proportional change, unit elastic. Okay, unit elastic if ED, right, elasticity of demand is equivalent to 1. Okay, everyone makes sense there? All right, what was my second example? And I'm going to go ahead and move over here and talk about the second and third examples, okay? So my second example was that my price, right, you guys remember what I said? Price went up by 10% in all examples. But my quantity demanded dropped by more than that, right? So my QD dropped by 15%. Is everyone with me? So what is my ED, right? My ED, elasticity of demand, is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded, which is, who knows, 15%, right? So it's 15% over the percent change in price, which was 10%. In all examples, it was 10%, right? You divide that, what does that equal to? 1.5, right? Everyone see that? 15 over 10? 1.5. Now, here's the thing. If my elasticity of demand is greater than 1, okay? If it's greater than 1, then it is elastic, okay? Elastic. My elasticity of demand is called being elastic. Okay? All right. Now we talked about unit elastic. We talked about elastic. What was the third example? You guys remember that? Inelastic, right? So let's go ahead and change it to number 3. Okay? So let's talk about number 3. Number 3 is number 3. I'm going to go ahead and erase all of this, right? We just talked about unit elastic. We talked about elastic. Now we're going to talk about inelastic, all right? So we said that our price went up by 10%, all examples, right? 10%. Quantity demanded in our third scenario was a decrease in less than the change in percentage, right? So our price went up by 5% or 10%. Quantity demanded in our third case dropped by only 5%. And we said that was called being inelastic. And how can we describe that? Well, we said ED is equal to the change in quantity demand or the change in price, which is 5 over 10, which gives me 0.5, right? Now, here's the thing. If ED, elasticity of demand, is less than 1, okay, then you guys can probably guess this. It's called being inelastic, okay? So, major things. If my elasticity of demand, ED, is equal to 1, then it's unit elastic. ED is greater than 1, it's elastic. If ED is less than 1, it's inelastic. Why is this important? Well, it's important because when you're describing in economic terms, right, how is my demand at that particular point? You can say it's elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic. Depending on the way you describe elasticity, as a producer, you understand how does a consumer respond to a price change, right? So say I'm in an area where it's inelastic, right? I can increase the price, right? Why do I care? Because I make more profits and I lose, less money. Because what happens is, coming back to this original equation that I have here, so total revenue is equivalent to price times quantity, right? If it's inelastic, guys, my price goes up by 10%, right? I said 10%. My quantity only drops by about 5%. My revenue is going to actually go up, right? Price is bigger than quantity. But on the other hand, if it's elastic, right, and my quantity demanded actually drops, my drop in quantity demand is bigger than my price, my revenue is actually going to go down. So it's really important to understand if we're talking about elastic or inelastic regions, okay? And I think actually before I get into a chart, I'm going to talk about more equations, okay? The next thing we're talking about is called a numerical coefficient of elasticity of supply and demand. So with that, I'm going to erase this and talk about the numerical coefficient of elasticity, okay? And why is that important? Well, it gives us a more specific value of what elasticity is. See, when I say the percent change and things like that, when we're given a percent change and it's only one example, well, it's easy to calculate, right? But in a more of a, economics, when you get a test for you guys, they're going to give you some numbers. They're going to say, hey, what is the elasticity of demand? What's the elasticity of supply? And the way you calculate that is using the numerical coefficient of elasticity. So you know what? I'm just going to also go ahead to total revenue. I hope you guys understand the total revenue is equal to price times quantity. This is something that's really important, even in business. It's really important to understand it. As economics majors, I want you all to remember that total revenue is equal to price times quantity, okay? Really important. I urge all of you to understand that TR is equal to P times Q. Should be in your mind. But, responsiveness, okay. All right, so let's talk about numerical coefficients. Numerical coefficients of elasticity. Okay, and we're going to talk about both the elasticity of supply and elasticity of demand. Elasticity. Okay? All right, let's talk about ED and ES. All right, let's talk about the numerical coefficient of elasticity of demand. ED, the equation is the following, and this is something you have to, I hate using the word memorize, but just know this. It's important, and it's pretty simple and straightforward. Okay? It's the change in the quantity demanded, right? In QD, right? Change in QD. I can write that a little better. Change in quantity demanded, right? What was the change in last time? We said 5, 10%. You can talk about it from a percentage standpoint, but it doesn't have to be. Just talk about the change in QD, right? It's the unit change in QD. It's not percent change, it's change in QD, okay? Over quantity 1 plus quantity 2, okay? Divide by 2. What does this whole thing say? It's the change in QD, okay? The unit change in QD. Understand it's not percent change, it's unit change. Unit change in QD over the average of the quantities, okay? Average of quantity 1 and quantity 2 times, okay, this is a times, the average of the prices, P1 plus P2 over 2, okay? This is a 2. Let me make that a little clearer for you guys. 2 divided by, you guys can probably guess the last part, it's the change in price. Okay? So this is my whole equation. It's kind of big, but once you understand it, it becomes kind of fast. Okay? So it basically says the elasticity of demand, the numerical coefficient of the elasticity of demand, is equivalent to the change in quantity demanded. Okay, the change in quantity demanded is unit change, not percent change. I'm going to say this over and over again because I don't want you to write the percent change. Okay, it's a very easy mistake to make. Divided by the average in the quantities, right? Q1 plus Q2 over 2, that's an average, times the average in the prices, P1 plus P2 over 2, over the change in price. Again, this is not a percent change, it's a unit change in price. Okay? And I'm going to let that soak in for you guys. But that's the way you calculate the numerical coefficient of elasticity of demand, right? So in the next example after this, I'll probably give you on a chart so you guys can calculate the elasticity of demand and the elasticity of supply. But this is the basic equation, okay? Now, that being said, let's talk about the elasticity of supply. The elasticity of supply, and I'm just going to say this ES, okay? Elasticity of supply is equivalent to the same thing. There's only one thing you change. In the elasticity of supply, this goes from the change in Q of D to, you guys probably guessed this, QS, quantity supplied. Everyone understand what happens? So in ED, the numerical coefficient of elasticity of demand, I said it's change in quantity demanded over the average quantity times the price over the change in price. In ES, the elasticity of supply, right? Elasticity of supply, it's going to change in quantity supplied, QS, okay? Over, this whole thing stays the same, okay? It's the change in the average in the quantities times the average of the prices over the change in prices. Everyone with me? Understand the numerical coefficients of ES and ED, okay? ES, you use a change in QS. ED, you change in QD, okay? Understand it's quantity supplied, quantity demanded. Elasticity of supply deals with quantity supplied. Elasticity of demand deals with quantity demanded, all right? Now let's move on to a chart that I have prepared for you guys to understand what happens when we have different elasticities, right? And their prices and quantity changes. All right. Actually, before that, let me draw a chart. Let me give you an example of, let's say, how to derive the numerical coefficient for elasticity of demand. All right. So let's say I have different points, right? Different points. And this is just data selections, okay? My point. Let's say I have different points. I have A, B, and C. Okay? And then I have the food I'm choosing today is pizza. Okay? So let's say I have price per slice of pizza. Okay? Per slice of pizza. And for points A, B, and C, I'm just going to drop this down real quick so it's a little easier for you guys to read. So A, B, and C. Okay? So let's say that it's 0, 1, 2. Okay? So at point A, the price per slice of pizza is 0. Point B, it's at $1. Okay? It's all dollars. Okay, and price C is $2. All right. What's the quantity demanded of pizza at this point? Well, if pizza costed nothing, okay, my quantity demand is going to be at the maximum, right? So let's say that's 6, okay? This is 5 and this is 4, all right? Then there is total revenue, which is TR, okay? My total revenue is quantity times price, right? So 6 times 0, I'm just going to do this. 6 times 0 is, I hope all of you know the answer to this, is 0. 5 times 1 is 5. 4 times 2 is 8. Okay? So that's equal to 5. And that's equal to 8. All right? So now the question is, what is the elasticity of demand? All right. Well, we define elasticity of demand as the change in the quantity, right, demanded over the average quantity times average price over the change in price. All right. Okay, so let's do this. So let's say that I went from the quantity demanded of pizza. In the first one, okay, I'm going to create a new section, and this is going to be called ED, okay? My elasticity of demand, okay? My first one, okay, I've not really gone from anywhere to anywhere, okay? So it's going to be 0 because I'm not moving anything, right? Because the way I'm going to talk about what's going to be important is when you move from one quantity to the other. So this is going to be 0, okay? Because I've not gone from anywhere to A, right? I've gone from 0 to A, so this is going to be 0, all right? The next one is the one that's important, okay? Let's talk about the transition from A to B, okay? So the quantity 1 is going to be dealing with A, quantity B is going to deal with B. So let's talk about how I've gone from 6 to 5, okay? So when I've gone from, actually no, 6 is talking about 0, excuse me. We'll talk about B, okay? So B, elasticity of demand. All right, so let's talk about the elasticity of demand for B. So this is 5 to 4, okay? So what is that? We've decreased by 1, right? This has gone from 1 to 2, so this has gone up by 1. Everyone see that, guys? This is 1, and this is -1. Okay, so we talked about the changes from point B to C. Okay, so we said that 5 to 4, we dropped by 1. Then we said B to C, we increased the price of pizza by $1. So then how do we talk about elasticity of demand, right? So we said elasticity of demand, right, is equivalent to the percent change in the quantity demanded over the percent change in the price. So how do we calculate the percent change in the quantity demanded? Well, this dropped by 1. So the percent change in quantity demanded would be 1 over 5. Does everybody see that? If I have dropped by 1, the percent change from 5 to 4 is 1, right? Is 1 over 5. So let me put that again. The units have changed by 1, but the percent change in the quantity demanded is 1 over 5. Okay? Very important. I'm talking about percent change. Now, that's divided by the percent change in price. Again, it's not the unit change, it's the percent change I'm dealing with this time. So I said elasticity of demand is equal to the percent change in quantity demand or the percent change in the price. The numerical coefficient of elasticity of demand does not deal with the price. That's a totally different equation, but this time I'm going to use the price elasticity of demand. All right, so let's start with the percent change in price. The unit change in price was $1, okay? But the percent change was 1 over 1, right? It's 100%, right? Because if my price of pizza was $1 and it went up to 2, it went up by 100%, right? 100% is the same thing as saying 1, okay? So it's 1 over 1, that's 1. That's equal, so the elasticity of demand is 1 over 5 over 1 over 1, so that's 1 over 5, and that's equivalent to 0.2, which is my elasticity of demand at point B, okay? And you do the same thing for point C. So the way you've calculated elasticity of demand is in 2 different ways, right? I've given you the first equation, which talked about the percent change in quantity demand over the percent change in price. The second equation was a little longer. It said the unit change in demand over quantity 1 plus quantity 2 over 2 times price 1 plus price 2 over 2 over the change in price, the unit change in price. So there are 2 ways of looking at it. I also talk about the numerical coefficient of the elasticity of supply, right? So we talked about elasticity a little bit. I hope you understand it's kind of measuring the responsiveness to price changes. I hope you went over you understand now why it's important as a producer to know how consumers respond to price changes. And in the future, in the next lesson, we'll talk about other concepts in elasticity, such as the cross elasticity of demand, which talks about how your elasticity responds to other product changes, right? Or income elasticity, which talks about changes in prices relating to income. Okay, so there's more to come in elasticity, and elasticity is a very important concept in microeconomics. With that being said, I'm going to summarize the ideas of proportional change, which is unit elastic, more than a proportional change, which was elastic, less than a proportional change, which was inelastic. That being said, I hope you remember the price elasticity of demand equation, the numerical coefficients equations. Go over that if you have the time, and try to do some problems to understand how that relates to it numerically. Here's your homework question before I let you guys go. Explain to me what unit elastic is. What is unit elastic? Okay? The answer to that will be in the next lesson, along with the more concepts to come in elasticity. Hope to see you all in lesson number 11. I'll see you again. Thank you so much.